Carl and Liam here from Games, Brains, and Head-Banging Life, gbhblofficial for short. And it's season finale time, episode 13 of season 1 of Are You Afraid of the Dark? The Tale of the Pinball Wizard. This is We're Afraid of the Dark. It is the finale, written by Louise Lemire and Tom Rack. We have 2 writers for this. And doesn't it fucking show?
Yeah, it does.
Indeed, and it's directed by DJ McHale. So while we do have a regular director, I will get to a point where it shows again another big issue with this episode. But first, the cast. We've got Joseph Poscat as Ross Campbell, Polly Shannon as Sophie and Princess Sophie, A.G. Henderson as Mr. Olsen, Tom Rack as the security guard and the sheriff, Natalie Gautier as homeless bag lady. And while that role isn't important, the other one, the evil witch, is Norman James as the executioner / wrestler guard. So yeah, hopefully with some of those second characters, you might be getting an image of what the hell is this.
Sounds super random.
Indeed, and according to DJ McHale, this is the most difficult episode out of the series to produce. It also took the longest time to film. He actually had to plead with the crew to break union rules and work an extra day. They agreed to work a day of overtime to help finish the episode. And the concept of the episode proved to be too hard to do in their budget, especially since they were at the end of the season when they were even lower on money. So DJ worked hard to get the story done and even wasn't going to direct it, didn't want to direct it, but ended up doing it because nobody else wanted to do it.
Oh, now I feel really bad about all the different ways I'm going to criticize the episode, knowing that they tried their best, and they were obviously had a lot of restraints, things going against them.
I don't, because if it's this much of a mess, you simply throw it in the bin and do another one and do something simpler and all that. And what you end up with here is an absolute mess of an episode that generally got me mad at certain times because I was like, it can't be this stupid. It can't be this dumb. It can't be this fucking pointless. Like it felt to me, I'm saying it now, the worst episode of the season.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to. There's been some bad episodes across, obviously Goosebumps, and even this show as well now. So I'm thinking, like, is there a worse? Is this possibly up there as one of the worst across the 2 shows, just in terms of like how messy it is and just how poorly done it is, considering the concepts and the potential,
Way down the line, although first, obviously, we'll have a tier ranking to follow shortly after the publishing of this episode, ranking the 13 episodes. And we're pretty much already saying where this one's going to go. But obviously, way down the line, similar to what we did Goosebumps, where we will take the best and the worst ranked episodes from all the seasons and create that ultimate tier list. So that's what would be interesting to see where that ends up. Because even when we did Goosebumps, it turned into quite a bit of debate over what would really be the worst episode.
That's true. I was pretty happy with where we came to on that, though.
I thought we did a brilliant job, personally. Okay, a couple more facts. This is the first episode that does not show a scene with the Midnight Society discussing the story partway through the telling. Yay! Finally getting rid of it.
Yes, thank you.
A.J. Henderson. He portrayed another character in the previous episode. He portrays Mr. Olsen in this. He also appeared in The Tale of the Dark Music as the Carnival Barker. Didn't recognize him, but yeah, he is. And of course, this episode marks the last time Eric will appear in the show. His reason for his departure is never explained, apparently. But yeah.
I do think
miss Eric?
Maybe not really, but I think it'd be quite interesting to, as it goes along, we're obviously going to get new storytellers, do like a tier ranking of like the best storytellers based on the stories they told. It'd be quite a fun one to do, because I think Eric might be kind of low down a bit.
we did very early on. We started this series off. That was one of the things we said we'd do when we got to the end, which was basically I am keeping record of all our storytellers, and we will separate and do a completely different tier list. No, not based around quality, except will be based around quality, but rather from the storyteller's perspective, and see kind of which character ended up with the best, really, overall. I am going to miss him purely for one reason: for telling a story completely based on Irish law and then proceeding to go, and this is where the plot thickens in the fucking worst English accent ever. rather than doing an actual Irish one.
That's true. And, that story and the way he delivers it has definitely stuck with us over the years. So maybe you're being a bit harsh on Eric. I mean, he's made such an impression upon our lives. So maybe he deserves to be rated a bit higher.
It is what it is. Our storyteller this time, though, is Gary, and it's his second story, with his first being The Tale of the Super Specs. So mixed bag from Gary. The Tale of the Super Specs was a fun and imaginative one, and brought in, of course, the very memorable character of Sardo, whereas this is an absolute joke. But there you go. 50-50 so far for Gary.
Also, it doesn't it kind of like break the whole idea of it when like the problem again, it's kind of like I had with Goosebumps. Sometimes I'm going to go on a little mini rant before we get into it. Just simply like it creates these potentially creative concepts where there's lots of possibilities, and obviously Gary's telling this story. And when you're writing a story or you're just telling it, you can make up anything you like. So if the story that we're seeing is what he's telling, then he's told a really terrible story where he hasn't been very creative and stuff like that. Because if it's really cheap in the way we're seeing it, and like the budget's not good and stuff like that, and what happens in the story is quite like tame, then like that's on him, really, isn't it? He should be telling a more grander story, really.
I would make the argument that even actually having to imagine, so there's no images, he's just telling this story. It must have been so fucking. I'm surprised the rest didn't have pen and paper to write down, because not only is it fucking all over the place from a storytelling perspective, it has so many characters playing several different roles that it like hearing it, you would just be like, you'd get annoyed with it, I think.
I can imagine you would. But maybe like just by describing it, it would sound better than it looks, maybe. I don't know.
Maybe. But before we get into that, we obviously started a campfire where David is playing his Game Boy. It's a Game Boy. It is definitely a Game Boy.
Game Boy, man. Can't hit on that.
Yep. And he's seemingly about to win in a game when Eric, making sure that this is probably why they kicked him out, comes across and says, "What does this button do?" And then resets the game. Who does that? Eric apologizes as Frank takes over while Kristen complains about their interest in games. Shut up, Kristen. That's why nobody likes you.
Go tell another love story, Kristen. Christ.
Kiki now grabs the Game Boy, starts to play as Gary reveals that he is tonight's storyteller. In his own words, when you play a game like that, it doesn't matter if you win or lose. Hey, it fucking does sometimes. This is because you can always reset and begin a new game and get another chance. But what if it did count? What if you had to beat the game, or the game is going to beat you, and there were no resets, no replays, and no second chances? And there you go. There's immediately the problem. I'm like, what? What does that even mean?
I just thought here like, oh, here comes Gary the nerd to tell a little story about magic and video games. That's what came to my head. Even though I actually quite liked his little setup later, it kind of like bamboozles you a little bit. You're kind of like, what? You just get.
It's also false. It's also false because the character in this will keep getting reset back to the earlier level.
Also, the character in the story is a complete idiot, and if it was a real video game, he'd have died 1,000 times. So.
Oh, yes. Submitted for the approval of the Midnight Society, this is the tale of the Pinball Wizard. Ross Campbell spends a lot of time alone, apparently, and is willing to find money for whatever he wants. We see him entering a huge 2-story shopping mall, checking payphones for money before deciding to help himself to money in a water fountain. Dude, that's just stealing. Don't be that person. And he actually gets into a tussle with a homeless woman over the spare change. It's like, bloody hell,
Great start.
Yeah. He gets chased by a security guard, hiding behind a display case that has a huge Super Soaker style water gun on it. Now, it's not a Super Soaker because that's a brand, but it's all I could think to describe it. It's like gold, and it's got like it comes as a 2-pack. You've got the big one, and then you've got like a little mini one. And the mini one, if you've seen Men in Black, looks like the cricket gun that Will Smith uses.
Yeah.
Wowed by it, Ross heads into another shop, which is run by Mr. Olsen, and it's a sort of fix-it shop where you bring broken anything, apparently, and he can fix it.
Yeah.
And here Ross has basically been bugging Mr. Olsen to give him a job, but Mr. Olsen's grumpy and refuses because he's sick of hiring kids. Ross tries to persuade him to hire him because he works cheap and is talented, referencing a previous employee named Stephen who got fired. But Mr. Olsen snaps at him, saying that all he seems to be talented at is playing pinball all day. Take a breath. what the fuck is going on? Like, immediately I'm like, wait, what are you trying to establish about this kid? He's desperate for money. Why? I don't really understand why. But now you're saying it's so he can play pinball all day? But then why does he want a job? Do you know what I mean? Like, this is a lot of things, just moving parts where it's like, pick one lane and go down that lane.
Yeah, I mean, all they had to do was start the episode with him playing a pinball machine. He's playing it like obsessively, and then he runs out of his quarters, right? And then he sees in the fountain, in the fountain there's some quarters. He tries to take some of the quarters to play more pinball. Then he gets chased by the security, and then he realizes, oh, I could do a little bit of work to get paid to play the pinball machine. It's simple, isn't it? Yeah.
It's so straightforward, and it will get you to exactly where we need to go in a short amount of time, but an easier and smarter, more established way of doing it. This episode, man.
Yeah, that's what really confused me about this episode is it didn't have anything like that. It didn't have him like they're trying to make it out like he is some kind of big gamer, some big pinball wizard. It's called. But we don't ever really get. I don't think we get to see him play pinball at any point in this episode, do we?
Oh, a little bit briefly with the special machine, but even then, that's done in a more of a sped up way.
Doesn't really like show you it particularly, and like it kind of don't know. But even I was kind of like debating whether or not it was a pinball machine because it just didn't really. Yeah.
Well, it certainly flies in the face of a title called Pinball Wizard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's still, though, I was quite pleased to see it was going to take place in a mall because I was like, okay, that gives you room and imagination because presumably you're going to film once the place is closed, and so you can kind of have a little fun with it overnight. Anytime I see a sort of American mall, that always gives me off Dawn of the Dead vibes. You get a little bit of it here, the way it's kind of looks and things like that. Always enjoy that.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the budget and having budgetary issues, but I imagine that was costly in itself. You can tell that when they're filming this, it's obviously late at night, everything's shut and everything like that. It's quite obvious. But yeah, that must have cost money.
It's how Romero kept Dawn of the Dead cheap, innit? It was all filmed mostly at night.
Yeah, but you can imagine that must have cost a little bit because you don't really see too many locations of like actual proper buildings with that in these episodes. Really, do you see them in people in houses and places like that, but not really like proper like a shopping mall,
No, you're not wrong, actually. Yeah, we do tend to stay in houses for the most part.
Yeah.
Ross doesn't give up, though. He follows Mr. Olsen to his back room and then notices something hidden under a blanket. It appears to be a new pinball game. Before we can get a good look at it, though, Mr. Olsen stops him angrily, claiming it's not working yet and it is a collector's item. He then sends Ross out, where we then see Ross go in to play other pinball games. So, there you go. There's some pinball. However, Mr. Olsen comes out to close up so he can have lunch. Ross, though, is now able to convince him that, look, I can look after the store for an hour. Basically, let me look after it for an hour as a tester. I'll just look after an hour. You can go over your lunch and I can keep serving people and so on. And Mr. Olsen agrees. He's like, fair enough. You know what? This is a good deal. But once the old man is gone, Ross goes straight to the hidden machine. So it's like, oh, well, good bit of trustworthy work there.
What kid could possibly resist?
Of course, who could resist a pinball machine? Because he pulls the cover off, revealing a beaster machine that seems to have a medieval theme. And I've tried to make sense of this as best I can. There are 3 levels to it that a player must complete, and Ross is immediately determined to beat it. I generally, because basically we're hearing this from him, I need to go up to this level, I need to get this, I need to rescue this. And I'm like, how does that work in a pinball machine? It's score-based. So if we reach a certain score, all right, level 2, fine. But explain that.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's why it confused me that this was a pinball machine at all. And I was a little bit underwhelmed by the way, this is obviously where the budget comes into it, how the machine, it looked. It did have like a handcrafted design to it, which it
looked cheap.
Fine, but yeah, it looked kind of cheap and underwhelming. You don't really see much of it as it is anyway.
True, we don't actually, you're right, because we then immediately cut to Mr. Olsen outside, apparently hearing the sound of the machine and smirking. So I'm like, oh, so he's a villain? Is he?
He wanted him to play it? No way.
Before Ross, though, can get into the game, the bell on the front counter goes off. Going out, he finds a young teenage girl named Sophie who has come for her music box. So basically, she had handed in a music box to be fixed and she's come to collect it. Ross is basically dumbstruck by her, like, that kind of thing. But he pulls it together and reveals he doesn't know if the box is fixed yet and that she should come back later or Mr. Olsen is back. So then he might as well close. You might as well close. If you can't serve anybody, why is the store open?
That's true.
She leaves and Ross goes back to the pinball game. So that entire scene only exists to introduce this character for later. Because it's utterly irrelevant.
Yep, pretty much.
So we now see time seems to go by with Ross putting more and more quarters into the machine. He continues to get better at it, making it further in the game and arriving at the third level, but he loses and apparently is unable to rescue the princess. And seemingly now, having had enough, he gives up and he leaves the shop to find them all in darkness, and apparently he's locked inside the building. So what is this? Like, this is something the episode doesn't do a good job of. What point did he get in? Is he in, like, he's in the game now, but at what point did that happen?
That's true. Yeah. There's no real, like, obvious transportation effects or anything like that that maybe would make it more obvious. Yeah.
Make it obvious for us. He hears a payphone ringing. He goes to answer, or Mr. Olsen asks him if he has an umbrella, basically. And we then hear the sound of the pinball machine followed by bright lights, and then it starts to rain quarters. And immediately I was aware that, okay, this is going to be just anything now, right? Anything without really any sense behind it. So you are, I was like, okay, so he's inside the game. But the game was medieval based. Why did he not get transported to a medieval style environment?
Yeah, no, it just remains pretty much exactly the same. Yeah.
Ross helps himself, but then sees a man dressed in a dark suit. Going up to him, another grabs him, and Ross sees that they're robotic. He struggles to free himself, eventually ripping off one of the robot's arms. More now appear. Ross backs off, realizing they won't approach him because of the water in the fountain being electronic. These guys, do you I don't know what the Red Dwarf episode is, but in it, Crichton, they're like in a different time period, and Crichton dresses like with a hat and a cloak kind of thing to look like a sort of
I mean,
yeah, that's what they reminded me of.
It's true. I can see that.
Before, though, he or us can take any of this in, because this is all happening quite quickly, he hears cries for help. And looking up, he now sees Sophie dressed like a princess begging him for help. And it's like, oh, God, I realized what this episode was going to be at this point. I was like, oh, no, don't do this.
Which is confusing. Like, when they wanted to do the whole saving the princess thing, why did they base it around pinball?
Just a video game. Yeah. I don't understand why any of this is pinball based. Why is this not just a video game? You opened a segment with about the Game Boy and video games and all that. None of this should be pinball. It should just be a video game. And then this whole scenario would make more fucking sense. Why pinball? Just a video game.
Yep, that's simple.
The tale of the video game master. Don't even have to have the word wizard.
No.
Anyway, we see Princess Sophie's being grabbed by an evil-looking man who's apparently from the pinball game and tells him to get the tiara from the vault, dropping him a gold key on a chain. And this is the problem. It is now going to drop in all these things that apparently he has to do to go through the levels. But we didn't see him having to do this in a pinball game. The evil-looking man, I didn't even realize. I've added a bit afterwards from the pinball game because I had to fill a blank in myself. You had why not? What's the tiara from the vault got to do with anything? I have no idea.
No, they didn't establish what the purpose of these items were beforehand, because then if they did, then you'd be like, oh, I know what that's for.
There it is. So Ross is able to get rid of robotic men with water, grabbing the key and using it in some lockers to find a tiara, which is a headband. Although we get some good old-fashioned Nickelodeon gunk to the face here, which I did at least laugh at.
Yeah.
Ross goes up to the next floor, seeing that the headband is now transformed into a silver tiara. He also now notices the quarters in his pockets are now marbles. Yeah, look, if you're struggling to keep up with this, just imagine sitting around that campfire, listening to Gary explain this. Oh, by the way, the headband is now a tiara. Also, the quarters that were in Ross's pockets are now marbles.
Yeah, it's... randomness can work sometimes, but not so much in this one.
No, sir. Sophie then calls for Ross to follow her, which he does. However, he ends up running into a witchy woman who scares him into backing up. Seeing Sophie being carried away, Ross continues to back up. The witch now blows on him, creating a strong wind that blows him down the hallway into a different room. And we see he's lost the tiara. The witch picks it up and she vanishes. With it. Yeah.
Yep. I mean, it's kind of like what you're saying, like imagine how Gary's describing it. I mean, you kind of are in the way you're saying it, and you can see how ridiculous it sounds.
And indeed, and in fact, thanks to YouTube's and general not dickery, the previous style that I've always tried to do with Goosebumps and the earlier Are You Afraid of the Dark of just adding segments in between our talk to give you concept, I can't do anymore because we keep getting copyright claimed and blocked. Blocked, not just anywhere, because sometimes it's just blocked in, say, like Russia or places like that, and I tend not to worry too much. But our biggest audience is not in the UK. It is in America. That is where we're getting blocked. Blocked to the entirety of America. And I've trimmed segments down to being a matter of 3 or 4 seconds long, and I still get it. So I've just had to, yeah. I'm hoping, I will still test, because I'm doing basically 2 tests. One with the segments in it and then uploading it and seeing if the claim is there, or one with and then whatever. So I'm hoping it might just be certain episodes or it might be certain seasons, because it's being claimed by the same it's the same company that's put them up on YouTube.
All right, that sucks.
Yeah, and I can't be bothered to go through the rigmarole of trying to counterclaim that as being fair use. I'll be doing it for every video. Hopefully I can with this one. Maybe I'll get away with some of it for this one because it's such nonsense. They'll be like, nobody cares.
Yeah.
Okay, getting back up, Ross goes after Sophie and finds her tied up in Mr. Olsen's shop. He frees her and she insists that they have to get the music box to get the other items. And I was just like, I'm sitting at this point, typing away, going, you're making my notes harder. What fucking music box? And why is this important now?
There is a point actually where he himself he's quite confused and he does actually question a lot of the craziness himself, which I did actually appreciate. Yeah, I think it is worth mentioning that I do give some credit to the actors for, they do
dealing with it.
They're trying their very best with what they're working with, so good for them.
Agreed indeed. Okay. Sophie running at so basically they now get attacked by the life-size dummy of the masked executioner that was standing in the front window, but they somehow also managed to get the music box from him and run outside, away from the executioner. Outside, they now see the witch is just standing there, about to put on the tiara. So Sophie plays the music box, and the music causes the tiara to vanish in a flash of green light, just as the witch was about to put it on. And here, I actually acknowledge what you said. Ross is just demanding to know what is going on, and everybody just ignores him. I'm like, yeah, Ross, what the fuck is going on? The executioner returns, is rubbish at attacking him, and Ross is able to get the mace off it. Sophie now reveals that they need to find a tiara so that she can be crowned. Stop adding stuff, Sophie, you annoying little melt. And they now see it floating in the air nearby, with Ross simply grabbing it. However, the witch now comes back, and Ross uses the marbles in his pocket to knock her down. So they came in use after all of that. But it's not over yet, because the sheriff now arrives and grabs Sophie. Sophie tosses Ross the tiara and tells him to take it to the 3rd level, which is basically 3 floors up in the escalators. Ross grabs it and the music box, heading up to the 3rd floor, finding and realizing that he's in the pinball game. And I'm like, no, you did not get to that. All of this nonsense did not make you go, oh, I'm in the pinball game. I would think that I was currently dying on the floor in the back of a shop, having choked to death on carbon monoxide or something like that, rather than think I was in the pinball game.
What do you mean? All this stuff that's been building up to this moment.
Such a big reveal, right? How good was it? He then sets up the throne, sits in it, and gets sent shooting down the mall. He ends up taking out the witch, but coming unstuck with a stronger version of the executioner. The sheriff now arrives and throws him into the elevator, which sends him back to the 1st level. And there you go, Gary. Your shit was nonsense. He's just gone back to the beginning.
Yeah.
Ross then realizes why Sophie told him he'd be needing the executioner's mace, and he uses that mace on a display case to collect the water guns. And again, I know this is boring, but this makes no sense in such a load of nonsense. If this is the pinball game, why are those water guns there? They were in the real world.
Yeah, that's true. I don't really get the point of that.
Ross gets them, heads back up as the sheriff is about to be crowned on the throne. Sophie is also there, being held in place by the robots. Ross stops the ceremony using the water gun to deal with the enemies because it's his game and he can change the rules, apparently.
Mm.
Ross goes to help Sophie onto the throne, but the sheriff attacks him. Ross now points out that it's not a game, it's real, and he can change the rules, which is a contradiction in itself. If it was real, you wouldn't be able to change the rules. If it was a game, you could.
Yeah.
And he uses the smaller water pistol to melt the sheriff. Having won, Ross gets friend-zoned with a kiss on the cheek from Sophie. I did laugh at that. I was like, oh, a little kiss on the cheek. Cheers, buddy. Hey, do you want to go out for some food afterwards? No. We're good. Finally, she sits down on the throne, puts on the cloak, and he crowns her. Everything begins to vanish, and Ross realizes he won. But no, because, I don't know, they decided they wanted a darker ending. He's still trapped in the game. We now see and hear Mr. Olsen gloating about Ross being trapped inside the pinball game. And we see Mr. Olsen starts to play a new game, and the biggest silver pinball appears. Uh-oh. And the effect is shit as well. But it feels like such a weird ending when put next to everything else that the episode did, because there's no scares, there's no frights, there's none of that kind of young audience thrills here. It's a very silly, and we've seen some of these episodes in Goosebumps as well, very silly, very nonsensical episode with this, let's throw a dark ending in randomly. And that's highlighted by the fact that we go back to the Midnight Society, and Gary then throws David, his Game Boy, back, and apparently everyone's like, no, I don't want to play anymore. Like, what, they're scared to?
Yeah.
I don't like this.
It was very, very silly. And I'm glad you mentioned Goosebumps, because that's the kind of vibe I got as well. It felt kind of Goosebump-esque, that kind of ending. But I did actually like that at least they went with the direction of having it being a bad ending, which I think it was warranted for the fact that I mentioned at the beginning about how this kid would never have survived for as long as he did. So in essence, I guess he failed in the end in some way, but how that happened or what any of it means or where he actually has been transported to, who knows? Because maybe you could do a thing where it pans back out to this pinball machine thing that this shopkeeper has made, and he's like pressing the buttons and he's looking down at the machine, and you can see him stuck in the game or something, But
I thought that's what they were going to do.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is like when we think of like potential other avenues they could have gone down for these stories, I don't think they're that complex. They're quite simple, and they didn't even do the simple part, which is probably the biggest negative you can say, really. Yeah.
And I want to add as well that the things that we come up with and the suggestions we make are based in the kind of storytelling that this episode does. Way back when we first were doing Goosebumps, we were kind of stuck in a horror mentality. So sometimes what we were asking or expecting was well out of the realm. But we have done so many of these now that it's easy for me and you to get in the thought process and the mind process of what would be acceptable for TV and what would be acceptable for this and all that. And they still don't do it.
No.
It is a flat ending, a very flat ending to a season overall that is much more hit and miss than I remembered or expected overall. And we will get into those details in the tier list and put them into specific places. But for now, this was The Tale of the Pinball Wizard, episode 13 of season 1. Look out for season 2 as we continue our way through the overall story and series and Are You Afraid of the Dark show. But for now, let us know what you think of this one in the comments. Thank you very much for watching. If you'd like to see more content like this, please consider hitting the subscribe button. It is gratefully appreciated. You can find us over at gbhbl.com, our full website where reviews, news and so much more goes up daily. We're also on all social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Threads, at GBHBL. Just search for GBHBL and you will find us out there. We also have merchandise on sale. You can access the shop via the website.